Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul, the podcast that transcends the boundaries between science and spirituality. Prepare to be uplifted, transformed, and awakened to create a path to healing your own life physically, emotionally, and spiritually by bridging the gap between science and soul. Welcome back to another episode of Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. Today, my guest is Dr. Emilie Clasgens Wilson, who got her Naturopathic Doctorate and Master's degree in Acupuncture and East Asian Medicine in Seattle, Washington. Her professional career includes specialties in mental health, psycho-neuro-endocrinology, and helping women lose weight and balance their hormones naturally. She's fascinated by the intersection of science and spirituality and splits time researching the latest scientific reports, meditating, and catching up on Abraham Hicks and Dr. Joe Dispenza's work. A difficult and life-threatening childbirth, followed by a challenging postpartum period, particularly with postpartum depression, lit a fire inside her to serve postpartum women during this intensely beautiful and vulnerable time in our lives. When she's not writing, teaching, or working with patients, she's found in the kitchen cooking and sipping wine with family and friends, or on a long walk to the farmer's market with her daughter, or watching something ridiculous and funny for the 85th time. She lives in Prescott, Arizona, but her heart is in Santa Fe. Emilie, it's such a joy to have you as a guest today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Lottie. I am so excited to be here.
So we actually go back a few years. We both graduated and for a short time, we actually worked in the same clinic.
We sure did back in tiny Prescott, Arizona, where, well,
right?
So it's a clinic, but we both.
So fun to reconnect, and so much has happened in the past few years. And I know that you're writing a book that is going to come out soon. And it's all about postpartum. So what is postpartum?
Oh my gosh, I love this question because it's a question that everybody assumes they know what it means, right? But we don't really understand what it means because it's just not very well defined. A lot of medical experts or people in the medical field will say, well, postpartum is just the time after childbirth. And it's that 6-week period after you give birth that your body needs to heal and recover, right? But the more we learn about postpartum and the more women share their stories about their postpartum experience, the more we see that postpartum is way longer than 6 months. I mean, for example, we know that it takes up to a year for a woman's hormones to become, rebalanced naturally and to kind of return to their own natural rhythm. And as women, our hormonal rhythm is so important to who we are. And then there's everything else that we have to go through postpartum, right? Which is, all the changes your body goes through in healing. So we have either perineal healing or healing from our a cesarean section. So there's all this acute healing that happens. There is this long-term replenishment of blood and nutrients that we lose in pregnancy and childbirth that we have to kind of get back built up again. There is the pelvic floor healing that can take a long time for women too. And that actually ended up being a big part of my story. And I'd be happy to share that if you wanted to hear about that. But basically what we know now is that postpartum is actually this whole world that kind of shakes a woman to her core, and it changes her profoundly. And I also want to say that not all of these experiences, the experiences that women have postpartum, are bad. For example, we've kind of turned the term mommy brain into something a little bit negative, right? But mommy brain is actually a side effect of the massive changes that our brains go through as new moms. And so just like in adolescence, we tend to think teens can be a little bit self-involved or forgetful or, very focused, but in a negative way. And with new moms, we experience we can be seen as having similar traits, but it's just because in adolescence and then in motherhood, our brains are growing and changing so much that we are literally no longer the same people that we were. We are in a chrysalis and we are changing.
Right. That's really fascinating. So when you say that the brain is growing and changing, is this because of the hormones or what happens?
Yeah, it's neuroplasticity gets the genes that regulate neuroplasticity get upregulated. And so we're making new synaptic connections. We are, yes, definitely under the influence of hormonal shifts and the massive rise in certain hormones. Of course, oxytocin is one that's released in huge amounts during childbirth and postpartum as we're learning how to bond with our new baby. And so, yeah, that's going to have massive effects on how our brain shifts and changes as well. But I really think it's almost more comprehensive than just hormones. It's like, our as in the case with epigenetics, anytime we put stress on our bodies, our genetic information will shift what it's printing or putting out there so that we can respond to the new stress or the new environment.
So I know that you had a journey yourself with your pregnancy and postpartum. So do you want to share your story of what you went through?
Yeah, I would love to. So for me, I have to say, relatively speaking, I was pretty lucky when as far as my pregnancy, I didn't get pregnant until I was 41. And so I definitely was a late new mom, a late pregnant lady. But despite that, I actually had a relatively, healthy and uneventful pregnancy, with the exception of, the migraines, the foot pain, some of the aches and pains that a lot of women get. But outside of that, like I said, I was pretty uneventful, pretty blissful, really. And so I remember being pregnant and thinking about what I was kind of looking ahead at down the road, which was this postpartum time. And it kills me now that even though I'm a doctor, I had no way of knowing what I would be up against, right? Because I thought, okay, I'm just going to do my best. I had decided at the time that I would go do placental encapsulation and take my placenta, because I heard that can help mitigate some of the side effects of postpartum, including postpartum depression, which, for me, I'm somebody with a personal history and a professional history of working with mental health stuff. And that was what drew me to working in the mental health field for a short time. And so the last thing I wanted was to return to a state of depression. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to take my placenta. It's going to help me get through this tough time. And I remember my baby was 8 days late. And that was such a stressful week because everybody was looking at me and going, "Where's your baby? Where's your baby?" And then when I told them I was still waiting, we weren't inducing because I was working with a midwife. They were like, "Oh my God, you got to get to the hospital. You got to make this happen." And so I was getting really anxious and stressed on top of just waiting for my baby. And she finally arrived, again, 8 days late. She came naturally. We were going to try and induce with some herbal therapies, but the night before I was going to start that, I actually went into labor. And so I labored for about, I can't really do that math very well anymore. My labor was probably only about 22 hours total and didn't get really intense until the morning she was born. And my water broke. I remember my water broke around like 9:30. And she was born at 2:12 in the afternoon. And of course, I had no idea what to expect for childbirth. I had a natural childbirth, which I always thought I wanted. And then I'll tell you right now that if I had been in the hospital, I would have been asking for drugs and probably a C-section because I wanted out of that situation. But, that was just me. But anyway, she was born And then I suffered a postpartum hemorrhage, and I actually lost almost 2 liters of blood very, very quickly. And so I was taken by ambulance to the hospital and was treated there. And that was how I entered motherhood. And so this is so significant because what I realized looking back was I entered this time of life that I had no idea what to expect, completely depleted, having suffered massive blood loss, and then of course just being tired from going through everything. And so what I realized in the early days is that there is no way to, or at least I had not found the way to prepare myself for what to expect in the early days, and as it turns out, my first year postpartum. And I'm definitely, I would consider myself a type A personality. I think a lot of us who go into medicine have that tendency.
Right. It's like the only way I think you can survive. You sort of have to be in order to put up with all that studying, and there's so much is expected of you, right? So you start being completely depleted, and then you go into your postpartum year. So what happened next? Did they give you blood, or did they do anything to supplements, or?
No, it was interesting. In the hospital, I kind of assumed I would get a transfusion, but they didn't give me anything. They monitored my blood levels. Because my hematocrit didn't go below 10, they let me leave, which I was ready to get out of there anyway.
Yeah.
But then of course it can tend to dip down after.
Yeah. And it's still going to take time because you're not entering motherhood with a good blood supply. You're really low, so you're going to be exhausted.
Yeah. And so, I think I really defaulted to that type A personality that I have, because I very much became somebody who was just, nose to the grindstone. We'll take it one day at a time, and we're going to get really hyper focused on the situation in front of us. And for me, that was just figuring out how to be a mom. And it was, day by day. And then, I went back to work really early. I started seeing patients virtually again the week after I gave birth. And then within a month, I was back in the office seeing people in person. And so I started trying to figure out how to juggle being a doctor and taking care of patients, and being a new mom and taking care of my daughter, still feeling obligated to kind of take care of other people in my family, and being a business owner and trying to take care of my business and this passion, this purpose that I feel like I have, so it was definitely one day at a time, nose to the grindstone. And my primary care doctor for a new appointment about 6 months after my daughter was born. No, 5 months after my daughter was born. And they pretty quickly diagnosed me with depression, which was shocking to me, because I was like, no, I'm just stressed out. I'm just really stressed.
Yeah.
And it turns out that no, actually, I did have a lot of the warning signs of depression. And I already had started looking into like this thing called postpartum, because this is really hard. And when I received that diagnosis, I declined medication. And, I'm not somebody who has a medication stigma. What I wanted to do was try and figure out myself, how to help myself get through this period of time. I wanted the chance to see if the medicine that I practiced and that I had trusted for so long could actually help me.
And so what did you find out?
Well, it turns out there is some really interesting research out there on postpartum, and I'll definitely share that with you. But the other thing that's really interesting to me is that there are so many holes and blank spots in the world of postpartum research. So this is still very much a new and developing area as far as our understanding of it. But really, what I'll share with you is probably not going to surprise you at all. You're going to say, especially as a doctor, you're going to say, oh, well, that makes sense. That makes sense. But there are so many basic self-care things that we can do postpartum to help, that the research shows help reduce our risk of developing postpartum depression or develop the severity of postpartum depression, the length of time a woman experiences mood issues. It can reduce her risk of developing chronic diabetes, chronic cardiovascular disease, and then again, chronic mental health issues that right now are dying from. Postpartum women tend to slip through the cracks in our medical culture. And they are kind of allowed to continue down this road of unwellness and develop perfectly preventable diseases. And what I realized is that if we can get a woman in pregnancy to start planning for her postpartum wellness in pregnancy, then what we have is an extremely powerful tool, not only to reduce her risk of disease, but also potentially save her life, because too many women are dying in pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum. And 4 out of 5 of those deaths are preventable. 4 out of 5 moms don't have to leave this planet early.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty scary when you hear the numbers and you realize, like, I think often it's the women that slip through the cracks.
And then who suffers? It's them, and it's their babies too. And I mean, I like that, just that thought has brought me to tears so many times, because, you know, how lucky am I that I was able to get through this period of time, and that I, you know, was resourced enough to be able to find out what I needed to know. And it turns out what I needed to know, a lot of other women need to know too.
Yeah, when you look back, you know, going into that pregnancy or going into that birth, what you wish, you know, you knew all the things that you know now, right?
Yeah.
But I would say that's so common of women going into giving birth, and then they ask their mothers or aunts, and nobody really tells them, right? I hear this a lot. Like, I asked and nobody told me what it was going to be like. You know, I wish I had known more and known better, you know, what this whole thing is about. It's almost, I don't know what it is, that it's almost a little bit taboo maybe to talk about it, or to talk about the difficulties that come along with that. It's not just a dance on roses to, you know, to give birth to a child. There's a lot to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny that you say that, because I have thought about that so much, that very situation, since I had my daughter. Because I remember one friend of mine, I asked her, you know, how was your delivery? And she said, I won't tell you. I don't want to talk to you about it, you know, basically indicating that something horrible had happened, but
Right.
you know, they're not thinking about it
Yeah.
anymore. And, you know, after I had my daughter, Amalia, I started realizing it's because we don't want to scare other women. We don't want to put any bad thoughts or, you know, bad energy into her head or into her body. And that gave me pause, because I said to myself, how much of my story should I share? You know, my story is not, thank God everything was okay, but I could have died that day.
Yeah.
But I in doing the research and writing my book, I realized I do need to share at least the basics of what happened, because it's so essential. I think that women know that these things happen even in healthy pregnancies. I had a very healthy pregnancy, did not have any cardiometabolic issues. And yet this completely unpredictable thing happened. And if it weren't for EMS showing up as soon as they did, plus the fact that I did a lot of adrenal work in my pregnancy,
It probably saved you, right?
there's a chapter in my book called Your Adrenals Might Save Your Life, because my adrenals saved my life that day. But you know, how many women could benefit from this information that just don't have it? And so I wanted to write the book that would kind of give them a way to create
Mhm.
their postpartum self-care plan, but started in pregnancy. So that by the time they have their baby and they're in their postpartum period, the habits are down. They know how they're going to shift postpartum, or at least they have a plan for how they'll shift. And if God forbid something happens, they have a list of red flags so that they know when they need to call their doctor or their mental health professional.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important book. I can't wait for it to be released because it's so needed. There's so many people that have no idea what they wish they had some sort of a handbook, right, to guide them through this journey. Because, like we were just talking about, the mom and the dad and the aunt and the uncle and everybody else in your family don't want to tell them about something terrible, right? Oh, it's just, I mean, I remember asking, oh, it's easy. Don't worry about it. I mean, it's a little painful, but it'll be okay, right? And you wish that you knew more going into it, what it's really about, and having a more of a plan. And
Mhm.
also, if something goes wrong, what is your plan if something does go wrong? Who is going to be the backup? Who's going to be there for the baby? What is the feeding? Do you have, like I was breastfeeding my child when I had my near death experience. We didn't have any bottles or formula or anything at home. I had already had two previous children that I was breastfeeding. Didn't even cross my mind that something would go that wrong. And so, just now they were dealing with me. I'm in the ER, and now they got to run to the store. My husband, my mom, my dad, and everybody that came to help get the bottles, get the formula, right? But you should have a backup plan for, well, what if something happens to me and I get stuck in the hospital? We should have at least a 2 day supply of formula and bottles and things so the baby will be okay for the caretaker, so we don't have to add and any more work. But we don't even think about it because we just assume that everything is going to be okay and that nothing's going to go wrong or it's not going to happen to me.
Yep. Yep. It is, I think, for so many of us, just beyond the boundaries of our comprehension, or because nobody thinks, oh, what happens if I pass away tomorrow? Or at least people who are young enough to become new moms, like that's not where their focus is. But yeah, that's a really valid point, especially given your experience. There are so many question marks in life. And one thing that I said in the book was, make your birth plan. Absolutely. I don't go into how to do that because that's not the scope of the book, but I said, make your birth plan, but know that it's probably not going to go that way. I remember I wanted what I called my 20 perfect minutes with Amalia when she was born. I wanted her to be born, and then I would hold her and nobody in the room would say anything for 20 minutes. So we would have 20 minutes of silence that, before I said anything and messed it all up, at least I would have these 20 perfect minutes with her, And of course that never happened. That was the one thing I was so sure was going to happen. And of course it didn't happen. And so there are so many things too that new moms just don't know that they should know or think about. For example, this formula question that all of a sudden your family was dealing with, what do we do? And the whole concept or world of feeding your baby is so huge as well. And that was huge for me. And so I created actually a supplemental guide to the book called Feeding Your Baby, just to help women understand a little bit more about the world of breastfeeding and the world of formula feeding if women should choose to go that route or need to go that
Yeah.
route.
And it's not always easy to breastfeed either. Sometimes the baby doesn't latch on, and like you just assume that everything is just going to go so smoothly, but it doesn't always do that, right? There's all these hurdles you have to overcome. Can't wait for your book. It's going to be such a good tool for all these moms out there, that because even if you've had children, right, like me, not they were all easy, and then the third child is what set off the cascade of events. So now, what do you currently have to offer postpartum women, and what are you doing that is different?
Yeah, thank you again for asking this question, because I think this is so important. When I started looking for resources for my own postpartum wellness, I found a lot of blogs, and a lot of things written by lay people, which is great. every woman benefits from her own experience and can share nuggets of wisdom with other women, but we can't guarantee the safety of a blog article, right? And so what I wanted to do was really consolidate some of this research that's happening on postpartum women and what's working for them into one resource that women can grab while they have the bandwidth, while they're pregnant, go through it, and then find practical tools that they can use to create what I call your postpartum self-care plan. And so really for women, I have a few different offerings depending on what level they want to try things out or what level they need support at. And so there is my book, which is called Post, The Essential Guide to Creating Your Postpartum Self-Care Plan in Pregnancy. And inside that, we walk you through how to create your postpartum self-care plan based on the research-based tools that provide the most benefit for women. And the four main topics that it turns out have the best research behind them. Again, no surprise, we're looking at diet, we're looking at exercise, we're looking at sleep support and stress reduction. But for postpartum women, the question becomes, okay, how do I do that realistically? And so really the postpartum self-care plan is about how do we break this down and give women a very simple, clear way that she can feel confident that she's helping herself recover and heal to the best of her ability without totally overwhelming her at a time of life where she needs to conserve her energy as much as possible.
Yeah, and you have that postpartum self-care guide. Is that something people can find on your website or?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's on the website, and I'll also send you the link so they can just get it right from the show notes. It's called the 6 Essential Steps to Postpartum Self-Care. And so that's a freebie. It's kind of a one-off thing, and it walks you through these 6 essential steps on how to create your own postpartum self-care plan. It's sort of a very, very basic version of what the book goes into. The book provides a lot more in-depth information, and it also walks you through how to create what's called your support team. And there are 2 elements to your support team. The first is your people. So family, friends, neighbors. You want to talk to them while you're pregnant and say, hey, would you be willing to help me out sometime? If so, what would you be willing to provide? What are some good days and times I might be able to give you a call? And maybe they can, say, I'll give you 1 hour a month. Or maybe they'll say, hey, I'll come over twice a week for 3 hours so you can nap. But whatever it is, you want to write that down now, and you want to put it in your postpartum support team plan. And the other piece of the support team is your medical team. And so that's going to involve your doctors, your mental health professionals, as well as when to call them in case you feel you need additional support. Because the number one thing with postpartum women is we do not get enough support, and we don't get enough support from our the medical system right now. And that's why women are dying and suffering. And so if I can help women understand that, no, you can ask your doctor for additional time and attention if you need that. And you can ask your partner or your mother or your father to be your medical advocate and be there in the room with you if you can't advocate for yourself for whatever reason. So it's really about empowering her to get the support she needs.
Yeah, so important. So important, because it's really not there, like you said. You don't get that kind of information when you go to the OBGYN. There's nobody that helps you set that up and understand that you'd be so much better off if you had those plans in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my thing is, if I can find a way to give a woman a resource, and it's the one-stop shop for her to help her get better faster so she can get her health back and get her time with her baby back, I've done my job. I've done my part. But, you know, I know that other women are going to want additional levels of support. And so I'm also creating a whole postpartum wellness program around this too, that women can enter in pregnancy, or they can enter if they're postpartum.
Mhm.
But it's about, you know, building and then implementing that self-care plan. And then they get tons of support inside of group sessions, one-on-one sessions. We're going to do activities like, you know, postnatal yoga classes, and we're going to have like pelvic floor healing experts, breastfeeding experts, yoga practitioners. People come in and teach us all of these, you know, host sessions and give women the information that they need and give them the space to ask questions and get support from other women and from wellness experts in one place. It's going to be like the one-stop experiential shop for postpartum women.
I love it. That's going to be great. And it's so helpful, and it's nice for other women to meet other women that are pregnant and going through the same things and learning at the same time. I know you mentioned in the beginning something about your pelvic floor. What happened to your pelvic floor?
Oh my God. Well, to this day, I don't know because we never did a full assessment, but I did have um, extensive tearing. And then I had what's called a cystocele. So my pelvic floor weakened to the point that my bladder started like falling. And I was doing some pelvic floor rehab that wasn't really helping. And I recently discovered a new device called a V-tone. And so I'm trying that out. It's for women with any type of urinary incontinence, pelvic floor dysfunction, including postpartum pelvic floor dysfunction. And what it does is it electrically stimulates the muscles of the pelvic floor to help restore their function and restore their strength. And I have to tell you, it's working. It's helping so much. So I'm honestly thrilled, because there was a little part of me that thought, you know, if my pelvic floor is forever changed for the worse, what is this going to mean for me 40 years down the road? Or 20 years down the road, or 10 years down the road? We don't realize how essential this part of our body is. I had no idea. I'd never thought of my pelvic floor. Not even in medical school did I think about my pelvic floor when I, you know, before I got pregnant, before I had a baby. But then it started being all I could think about.
Right? No, I hear you. Yeah. It didn't really teach you much about the pelvic floor. At least we didn't learn much about that. Um, it's more, I think, an OBGYN type issue. But
Yeah.
then different physical therapists are trained differently, that so some are better at the pelvic floor than others, depending on the education they had. And so you really have to shop around, right? You have to shop around for your doctor, shop around for your physical therapist, to get to the people that know something, right? So you're a naturopath trained in acupuncture, but you happen to know a lot about postpartum because you had your own experience, right? You go to somebody else who is a naturopath, they may not know anything, right?
Yeah.
Because they had an easy birth. They never studied it. They never really got into it. They have heard of other people, but it's not the same. So the fact that you had your own experience, you know, is going to help so many more women out there and prevent things from happening or going wrong for them.
Yeah. You know, I remember feeling so alone in my postpartum time. And again, as a resource person, I had my family around me. I realized I was in a much better position than so many other women might find themselves if they're postpartum and they're depressed and they're feeling alone and they're not eating well or sleeping. And I want to help as many of those women as I can during one of these like intensely vulnerable times in our lives. So it's funny, my daughter, you know, she was a gift to me in so many ways. And one of them was kind of finding my purpose, really.
Right. I know. Isn't that funny how your purpose sometimes comes along with something that goes wrong, but you know, she came in to give you that experience
Yeah.
so that now you can help all the other women.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, how can people learn more about you or work with you? Do you have a website? Do you have Facebook, Instagram?
Yeah, so I do have my website is sanoswellness.com, and that's S as in Sam, A, N as in Nancy, O, S as in Sam. I always spell it out because otherwise people think it's Samos, but and then I'm also on Instagram with the same name, so Sanos Wellness. And you'll see currently a little bit of language around a lot of language around postpartum, and then still some language around my previous incarnation as a doctor, which was as a women's hormone, cardiometabolic, and weight loss specialist, because my healing journey also involved me losing almost 40 pounds. So there's a lot of information available, but a great way to get in touch with me, if you have any questions, you can go to my website. You can reach out to me on Instagram. I am also on Facebook, but I'm not quite as active there.
Yeah, and we'll put all those links in the podcast notes as well. So sanoswellness.com and the Facebook and the Instagram links. And to stay tuned about your book, when that's coming out, they just go to your website.
Yeah, they can go to my website, but a great way to make sure you stay in touch is to grab a free copy of the 6 essential steps to postpartum self-care. That's a totally free guide that if you do nothing else with any of the things I've created, you will have an excellent resource in your hands to get yourself through postpartum. And I will give you the page where they can go and grab that as well.
All right. Yeah, so that's great. We'll put that in the podcast notes as well.
Perfect.
So it's just been such a pleasure to have you as a guest today and share your experience with all the listeners. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Lottie. I am so grateful that you extended the invite, because I just absolutely love sharing this. So thank you.
As we conclude this episode, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for your presence within our community. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with friends and family. Subscribe to my newsletter in the show notes and receive new podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox. If you resonate with the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul, and are motivated to embark on a journey of personal healing, I invite you to connect with me at drlottie.com. Together, we can pave a path towards transformative healing in your own life.